President Trump wins North Carolina.
Donald Trump will win in Georgia when all the votes are counted.
That Donald Trump will win the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Donald Trump has won the state of Wisconsin, which means he is the winner of this race and will return to the White House as this country's 47th president.
Rough week, am I right? Hey everyone, Atlas here. A couple of days ago I gave you my 2024 election forecast. I predicted that Kamala Harris would win the Electoral College and thus the presidential election. In case you haven't somehow realized by now, that is not what happened. In my defense, I did warn you in advance that I was a dumbass. But a lot of people are terrified and depressed right now, and that's obviously understandable. But some people are also in total shock. I mean, how could America choose to vote in such a horrible, racist, vile, and stupid individual, even when they saw with their own eyes how bad of a president he was? Well, there are several reasons this happened, and this isn't just some sort of post-election conjecture. I've talked about these problems several times over the past few months. As I said previously in my forecast video, as well as countless times on Twitter, the Harris campaign was just objectively awful. And it's even more awful because at the start of the campaign, it was fantastic. And the numbers reflect that the voters felt the same way. Kamala saw how well she was doing and decided to do a complete 180 in terms of campaign strategy. Biden dropped out of the race and endorsed Harris, and while it took her a couple of days to orient herself, she eventually started building massive momentum. This is for a few reasons. One, she was not a decrepit old corpse, but she also immediately shifted the campaign's rhetoric on the Palestinian genocide. Now, obviously it's not like she called for the dismantling of the Israeli apartheid regime, but it was a substantial step in the right direction. Thirdly, her campaign platform was actually progressive, and it even went on the offensive. Wow, can you imagine that? Democrats going on the offensive. Oh, and get this, her campaign actually listened to feedback. And all of these great changes were rewarded with massive momentum and enthusiasm, with Kamala leaping closer and closer to Trump by the day. A little later, during the Veep stakes, the campaign received even more momentum with the nomination of Tim Walz for vice president. And for a moment, there was hope. People likened the momentum of the Harris campaign to Obama's campaign in 2008, a campaign that was extremely successful and ended with a landslide victory. It seemed that, just for a moment, the Democratic Party was finally ready to start trying to win elections. But all of a sudden, a few days from the DNC, something changed. Suddenly, she started listening to the wrong advisors who told her to do a complete 180. Why she decided to listen to them is beyond me. My personal theory is that the DNC killed Kamala and replaced her with a clone of herself. But regardless, she started appeasing the fascists. Ha! You thought the Democrats were gonna run a good campaign for once, didn't you? Pfft, dumbass. Instead of a medieval vanity project, the wall turned into a good idea. But Kamala could build it better than Trump could. Instead of talking about the world's greatest humanitarian crisis, she talked about Hamas. Instead of being the peace party, Kamala tried to turn the Democratic Party into the Lockheed Martin party. And when they asked Kamala how she was going to be different from Joe Biden, the campaign who is hated by just about everyone, all she could say is that she would make her cabinet bipartisan. I mean, what a bold and imaginative policy, right? I'm sure the young people showed up in droves, absolutely begging for the chance to vote for Kamala Harris. And as time went on, it kept getting worse and worse and worse. No arms embargo, sending Richie Torres to Michigan, holding hands with Liz and Dick Cheney. Oh, would you look at that? You're asking me about the economy? Well, did you guys know how excited my mom was to buy her first home? You know, I actually grew up in a middle-class family. Oh, would you look at that? The 2 minutes is up. Oopsies, sorry. Even when asked a softball question about whether or not she believed gender-affirming care should be legal for adults across the United States, she said she believed in following the law. And every time she made these mistakes, we warned her time and time and time again. But she stopped listening. And don't think it was only Harris's fault. Joe Biden is obviously at fault for the result of this election, arguably even more so than Kamala was. It's no secret that by the time the 2024 election cycle kicked off, Joe Biden was in no way, shape, or form fit to run a second term. By this point in his presidency, his brain had been reduced to the consistency of oatmeal.
We finally beat Medicare.
America can be described in one word. Honestly, it was even a miracle that Joe Biden had survived this long. But not only was his brain the consistency of mush, he was also deeply unpopular, and the people on the left had been warning the Democratic Party about this for the past 2 years. But of course, the Democratic Party never listens to us, because they'd rather cling to Reaganomics with a liberal aesthetic than stop literal fascists from taking power. Then came the first presidential debate, which went about as well as you might have expected.
We finally beat Medicare.
And suddenly, like they were visited by the ghost of FDR overnight, the Democratic Party elites realized that they were completely and totally fucked. And suddenly, the establishment rapidly changed their tune, and calls grew among Democrats for Biden to drop out. But even in this moment of desperation, Biden would still not concede, because he's a headstrong, narcissistic, conceited, decrepit old man who was too concerned about going down as a one-term president like Jimmy Carter to give a shit about the goddamn people he was supposed to be protecting. And all his aides continued to encourage his little temper tantrum until he finally gave in a few weeks later. All of them knew that Joe Biden stood no chance at re-election. Do you know why I say that? Because when Kamala took over the Biden campaign, they found that the internal polling of the Biden camp showed an electoral map where Donald Trump would win by 400 electoral votes. I mean, look at how insane this map is. But despite the evidence staring them directly in the face, the Biden camp still held out to the last possible minute. And look where that got us. So when you are looking for someone to blame for Trump getting reelected, maybe you should look towards Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the rest of the Democratic Party elites for being too conceited, stubborn, out of touch, narcissistic, and greedy to give a shit. When you lash out at people who voted third party and harass them and wish that they kill themselves, you are not only acting like a baby, you are also coping. First of all, even if every third-party voter in the country had voted for Kamala, it still wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election. Secondly, if you're one of those people who thinks people who consciously objected to voting for Kamala were doing it to feel morally superior or because they're just pretend activists, you need to take a step back and look at yourself. You are claiming it's unreasonable or selfish to refuse to vote for someone who willingly enabled the mass murder of tens of thousands of people. It's an argument that really gets under my skin because, first of all, just about all the people who have voted for the Green Party because of Palestine are Muslim or Arab, meaning most of them have family in Gaza that is either actively suffering or is dead. But also because those third-party voters are generally the ones who have been in the streets the most fighting for the cause of Palestinian liberation, and a lot of times they're the voters who would be persecuted the most under a second Trump term. So yes, I think it's 100% reasonable for you to withhold your vote in protest of an ongoing genocide. I also think it's incredibly reasonable to decide to vote for Kamala as a means of harm reduction. It's an incredibly tough choice, one that I personally struggled with for weeks. What isn't reasonable is bullying and making moral judgments about your comrades based on a philosophical disagreement like that. Things are going to get difficult in the next few months, so we need to put aside our differences in service of our communities and in service of humanity as a whole. We can get through this, but only if we rely on each other. So let's pull it together. I know everyone is frustrated, scared, and sad, and it's okay to feel those things. but don't take it out on your neighbors and comrades who by and large want the same as you do. Don't forget that empathy is the core of our creed. We have to remember that. There are obviously other factors that played a role in Kamala's defeat, a lot of which are direct effects of America's refusal to address the material conditions of the average person. I mean, if you look at it from the Marxist angle, under a late-stage capitalist system like ours, as conditions worsen, you see the rise of fascism, but also the rise of socialist ideas to meet the occasion. And if the Democratic Party refuses to embrace socialist ideas, or at the very least refuses to do anything to address the material conditions of the proletariat, then yeah, when the right is running on a fascist platform, of course you're going to lose, because the proletariat is disillusioned with austerity and civility politics. Anyway, going forward, I want to start talking about what impacts the incoming Trump administration might have, as well as how you can prepare for the turbulence ahead and keep you and your communities safe. So please stay tuned for that. But for now, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing and leaving a like on this video. Leaving a comment really helps a lot with the algorithm. But once again, your support means the world to me. Thank you all so much. Again, hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Or hope you guys are taking care of yourselves. Make sure to reach out to your friends, family, people you know are going to be negatively impacted by this. You know, focus on that community healing and preparation. I will see you all in the next one. Peace.